Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Gelera. So I wrote about the Zoot Suit riots and I'm going to share my screen right now. All right, so here we have my first title slide. I actually wrote this paper for my History 499 class in Cal State Long Beach. It was mainly to focus on our strengths as a writer and to also showcase our senior thesis. My teacher, Professor Jane Dable, actually told us to write about riots and conspiracies. So I decided to write about something that means a lot to me, knowing that I myself am Mexican American. So I decided to write about, a very sensitive time. And when we were talking about riots, the textbook definition actually correlates with knowing that it is a violent disturbance by the peace of a crowd. And when I thought about riots, there's different historians really deciphering meaning of it. And I think it is more like a series of clashes because what happens is that we're going to see later on that there's a white servicemen coming into the Los Angeles area during World War II, and they actually confront the Mexican American youth there. So I will begin. My name is Samantha Gelera, as I already mentioned. I'm a first year credential student in social science at Cal State Long Beach. I just got accepted. I got my BA in history just last year. I wasn't able to attend my graduation, but I still had a lot of fun knowing that I worked really hard throughout my 4 years there. I also have a minor in Spanish because I wanted to get to know my culture more. And my research interests are that I'm really interested in gender and sexuality, youth culture, and immigration history. So you're going to see a little bit more of that into this presentation for sure. All right, so we have an overview right here. We're going to start with talking about what were the riots during this time. And then I'm really focusing on the causes because we know more about the effects afterwards, but the causes are the ones that are really breaking down and constructing the social context of it. So we have increase in racial discrimination, the Zoot Suit backlash, and bias in the criminal justice system. So I chose this picture right here. It looks very villainous. And as you can see later on, newspapers will actually defend white servicemen's their efforts of law enforcement onto this community because initially the Zoot Suit is seen as defiant. And during this time, we see them entering social spaces that already have decades of Mexican American influence. And so between, I believe it was the first week of June in 1943, that's when we see these violent clashes. And we're going to see more about what happens after that. So we have first cause right here, which is the increase in racial discrimination. We have this lady holding up a sign saying, "Stop illegal raids by immigration department." And what we're going to see later on is that during the Great Depression, there's this movement called repatriation. And repatriation, it basically means that a person voluntarily decides to go back to their country for economic reasons or because they have land. But we're going to see that there's actually another factor that's pushing people to go home. So we have the 1930s, and obviously the Great Depression is this time where this economic collapse overtakes so many things in American lives. And President Herbert Hoover actually makes this formal statement saying that foreigners are taking the jobs that rightfully belong to native-born Anglo-Americans. This is definitely racist in its context, and we see this translate into the Great Depression, where law enforcement and government officials are making these bold statements in their documents, labeling Mexicans and Mexican Americans as a social burden. And we're going to see in the next slide how there's compulsory deportations and how this manifests racial discrimination in a place such as Los Angeles, where there's many immigrants coming from different places. So we have this newspaper article right here, And La Opinión is actually a Spanish newspaper that, talks about these deportation rates. And, thank God for them, because they are doing their best to actually inform the community on like what's happening. And we see this event right here on February 27, 1931, where we have these policemen. They're dressed up as civilians. They're assisting LAPD. They notice that they see Mexican Americans in La Placita Olvera, and they detain them because, they are a threat to society, and we don't want them here, especially when there's a Great Depression. So how does this inform the Mexican American community? It informs them because they are able to inform others, and then of course this incites fear in the community, and it's really awful because we notice that there's controversy against them, and the U.S. government is purposely trying to remove them from the area. And we have the second cause right here, which is the Zoot Suit Backlash. We have this gentleman right here. He is wearing trousers. He has this nice coat on top of him. And what ethnic historian Luis Alvarez points out is that men in the West Coast, they like to wear these colors, which are brown, white, black. And then actually, during this time, the Zoot Suit is frowned upon because we have rationing going on, and what the board states is that the Zoot Suit is using up a lot of material, which could be used for those that are fighting. And those that are donning this outfit are actually not for the war effort. So when people see these members in society wearing these outfits, they're looking at them with resentment, thinking, why are you spending all this time making this outfit for yourself when you could just, use it for those that are proudly fighting for our country? And we also have women wearing their version of a Zoot Suit, whether it could be, very fancy, very outlandish, or, for their own comfort. So we're just gonna see in the next slide, what is the origin of the Zoot Suit? Because when the Zoot Suit riots break out, people are wondering, like, where does this suit come from? And we have the first picture right here, which is Cab Calloway. He, wears his Zoot Suit proudly in performances. And we also have Clark Gable, as Rhett Butler from Gone with the Wind. And he is actually, has his own style of a suit for a Southern gentleman. And then we have the third, which is African Americans, wearing their version of the Zoot Suit. And this actually is from the Zoot Suit itself is an influence directly from African Americans. So it's not just for Mexican Americans, other minorities are actually wearing the Zoot Suit as well. And it's for, to proudly say that they are rebellious and they are representing their youth. At this time, we have two distinct members of society. We have Pachucos and we have Pachucas. And Pachucos, they are the masculine figure of the Zoot Suit culture. They are able to go out in society. Some members do look at them with resentment. And Pachucas, people see them as sexually promiscuous, and they don't like how they're wearing, heavy makeup. They have their hair in a coif, and they're wearing this type of outfit that generally is seen as belonging to the male member of society. So we do have sexism because at this time, Pachucas, they are also breaking social norms. We also have this gender historian. Her name is Elizabeth R. Escobedo. She interviews a relative of hers named Ida, who worked at a defense factory making incendiary bombs. And she makes enough money to buy her own suit for her ceremony. And her mom looks at her like, what are you doing? Like, why are you wearing that? And, Ida replies, oh, I'm wearing this because, it makes me feel great about myself and everyone else is doing it. So this is definitely seen as like an act for teenagers to rebel and break social norms. But at the same time, white Angelenos are seeing the Zoot Suit as disrespectful to society, and they've had it. So what they see for the Zoot Suiters is that they are bizarre creatures, Also that they're fashioned in a sense in accordance with imagery and symbolization of the American home front. So we definitely see a different caricature of this society. And we have the bias in the criminal justice system. I chose this photo because we see here a sepia photo of these members in a courtroom. They're about to, be questioned, and you'll see why in the next slide why this is very significant. I titled this The Nightmare because when I learned about this case, I thought that, how could something like this happen back then, especially at a birthday party? And we see here that there is this gentleman named Jose Diaz in August 1942, so summer, right before he's about to be in the military. He is celebrating a friend's birthday party on a Saturday night. And what happens is that uninvited guests, they come into the party, they ask for beer, they're disrupting what's going on. They're kicked out. And there's this gentleman there with his girlfriend. They get apprehended by this group once again, by the uninvited guest, that is. And the 38th Street group with which that gentleman is from hears about this and engages in this intense fight. So what happens is that there's this big clash, and after the fight, Jose Diaz's body is discovered, and no one knows what happened. No one knows who did it. They just find his body there. And here's this map that details exactly what happened over in the side. And this case will initially be known as the Sleepy Lagoon case. There's a popular song during this time that everyone knows about, and they talk about how this happened around the Sleepy Lagoon Reservoir. And this event traumatizes a lot of the youth, and it definitely does bring to the attention of violence in the community. But then we'll see later on why law enforcement gets involved, and then definitely racial discrimination does become more influenced here. So these youth, they are succumbed to the criminalization, in which the Sleepy Lagoon case is a period where there's racial tension. These members of society are seen as juvenile delinquents. And we have here, very influential people where Judge Charles Frick is insisting that they keep their appearance in court. That they don't have time to go home and change, to clean up, anything like that. They need to keep their unkept appearance so they can be seen as gang members. Initially, this helps the prosecution, and even Lieutenant Edward Duran Ayers formally states that Mexican Americans, what is going on with them is that they have a biological tendency to commit crime. This hurts the image of Mexican American youth during this time. And we know that this is wrong. And when I was reading the document, I was thinking, how could someone say this? How could law enforcement, just say this out loud in court? And there's no filter here. So we must think of how will this play out into the case? Will they get, acquitted? Will they get convicted? Luckily, they get acquitted at the end because Mexican Americans and everyone else, they invite members to speak out against the racist accusations towards the members that are involved in the Sleepy Lagoon murder. And what my conclusion is that individual accounts helped me out here. There are many primary sources that talk about the gender aspect of the Zoot Suit riots, how it also affected women. We also talk about how the case itself could be a whole different paper, right? And racial discrimination during the 1930s really subjects Mexican Americans to an inferior position. And we look at this in a way that Anglo-Americans are purposely putting them towards that position, that notably in this region, in this time, they're equating their Mexican counterparts with the labor force, just industrious and disposable as well. And what we notice here is that Mexican Americans are rising, they're taking pride in their bicultural lifestyle, and they're speaking out against social norms that the older Mexican Americans uphold during this time. And with mob-like actions that are seen in the Zoot Suit riots, we notice that we must look at this through a lens that is social, political, and economic as well, because there are so many different things going on during this time, during World War II. And I would like to thank, honestly, this research paper has made my life a lot more uplifting because I can see this happening more so in society. We have the events that happened last year. We noticed that there is a culture within law enforcement that talks about racism and how it definitely plays a big part in our community today. And I have my acknowledgments right here, which is, of course, my teacher, Dr. Jane Dable. She's the one that, recommended me to the Los Angeles City Historical Society. And she believes a lot in me and my writing skills as well. I also want to thank Dr. Brianna Jex. She taught the Chicano history class at CSU Long Beach. And she, with her quizzes and incessant articles, I was able to really look deeper into the Zoot Suit riots and, go into the CSU Long Beach Library, which has an enormous display of primary sources. And I was able to check out a lot of books and really take this into my own individualized account. And then we have the wonderful documentary, which is the PBS, The American Experience, where I saw more participants of this Zoot Suit culture talk about what they were witnessing, how there was this gentleman that was in a movie theater, just watching a movie with his date, and there's this serviceman who comes in and starts looking for Mexican Americans, and he's wondering what's happening, and he hears a lot of commotion, and they're scared because they're wondering, why did this person come into a place of entertainment, right? So that documentary really talks about even the serviceman's perspective of like how they were supposed to attack these Zoot Suit riders. They would grab, I remember there was one gentleman talking about how it was kind of like a sock. He would put, I think it was money inside of it, and that's how they would use to attack them. But overall, I've learned a lot about the Zoot Suit riots and how I believe that this should be taught more in schools, not as just a negative thing, but we can learn a lot from this. And this shouldn't be erased from the curriculum. This should just be introduced more so. So that way we are aware of the underlying tensions that happened during this time that echoed racial discrimination, backlash against a social figure that mattered so much to the youth, and of course, discrimination in the criminal justice system. And that includes my conclusion. Thank you so much for having me here. I had such a wonderful time talking to a bunch of you, and that is the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you.
We do have one question. Could it be that the efforts to contain the Mexican Americans at this time were a hangover from the sanctioned removal of the Japanese in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I would like to answer this. I was wondering, does this question kind of resonate with Japanese internment at the time? Because that's the only thing that I'm really thinking about.
I think that's what.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
It's interesting because I did read about how, there are people that, like the older Mexican Americans that are obviously very upset with the Zoot Suit itself, but some of them do support like the sanction removal of Japanese in LA. Mm-hmm. So we're wondering, how is this happening? Like, why do we see this as a growing problem in society? I think that yes, that the efforts to contain the Mexican Americans to, subordinate them during this time of World War II obviously has to do with a nativist ideology. And we do see this happening with Japanese in LA. We also have a second question here.
Yeah.
How did Mexican-born people in LA or maybe in Mexico see the Mexican-American identity that is tied to Zoot Suit rights? Okay, so I did see some newspapers that were in Mexico talking about Zoot Suit, and they obviously see it as strange because we don't really see this, because I believe that they saw it as more of like a Texas influence as well. They thought, okay, well, this is probably an American thing. They're using a lot of material, and this is not really like a respectful outfit. So I think that Mexican-born people in LA and even in Mexico, they're seeing the Mexican-American identity as, it's growing, it's rebellious in its nature, and it's defiant as well.
I'm curious, did you encounter any cinema, any film about the Zoot Suiters? I think I first became aware of them through the Broadway play Zoot Suit with Edward James Olmos. That was many, many years ago.
Yeah, that was the main one. It was Zoot Suit. I actually watched it after I did my papers just to get some more insight. It was mainly for my third section, which has to do with the bias in the criminal justice system. So that film actually opened my eyes more. I mean, of course, it's based on real events, and there's other perspectives that are coming into play in that movie. But that movie uniquely shows us the racial tensions that are happening during this time. And then, even Mexican Americans, they're going into the war effort. They're probably fighting for their country. And, this criminalization happens that takes over their lives, that paints a different picture of the Mexican American youth.
I noticed a name when I was reading your paper that reminded me of another movie. You mentioned the lady who did a lot of the legwork, the research for the defense in the Sleepy Lagoon case. And I believe I saw a movie about her.
It was Alice McGrath, is that correct?
Yeah, right.
Yes.
I think there might have been a movie about her, maybe 20, 30 years ago.
I don't think I've seen an actual biographical movie of her, but she is mentioned in the Broadway play, The Zoot Suit. Yes.
Yeah, it's been a while since I saw that.
Yeah.